Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your girl Mitzi, and this is Mitzi. Let's think about it. Today we are thinking about defining poetry. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is a thinker, so we will be thinking about defining poetry with my special guest Bill, who's going to really help us think about this in a whole new way. So thank you so much, Bill, for coming onto my show, sharing your time and your perspective with me. I'm excited to speak about this. So let's just dive right in. When you hear the words poetry, what does that necessarily make you think about?
Well, it's funny because I actually kind of backed into it as a form of writing. I actually didn't go back to school till I was in my mid 30s. I was, in fact, when I got involved, my classmates called me the blue collar poet because I had served in the Navy, and then afterwards I kept working on ships, and then I guess I was in my early 30s when I finally decided, it was time to go back to school. A couple of things kind of pushed me in that direction. And actually, when I started school, my original intent was to be a history major. Always loved it, always enjoyed it. And so I was going to major in history, but then got sidetracked by one of my first English professors, liked the way I wrote in his class, and pulled me in first into the student newspaper and you know brought me in there, and it was at a actually a regional journalism. I was in Florida. It was a regional journalism convention they had. It was Georgia, Florida, and Louisiana, I believe, was included. And there was a workshop called How to Improve Your Writing. And I was like, well, it's always a good thing to get. And
Yeah.
it was actually a very short workshop because the woman got up there and says, you want to make your writing better in anything, try writing poetry because of the requirements that you have to follow form. You have to pack as much into every single word as you can. You have to be aware of what's going on, and it just makes you a better writer in journalism, business. I don't care what you go into. And she said, you're almost being stingy with language in poetry. And essentially, she challenged us all there. She said, now, here's the thing. Before you leave this weekend, try writing a poem.
Mhm.
And during the weekend, this is in Tampa, Florida, and I was out one day. We weren't doing anything, and I found one of those old, uh, like 1950s diners on the street, and I said, I've got to go have breakfast there, and that became the subject of my first poem. I just loved the place, and I kept thinking of Tom Waits, how much he would have been at home here. And that was my first poem. And basically, that was it. I wasn't looking back after that. I ended up majoring in creative writing, and poetry has sort of become my shtick. Not that I don't go into other areas, but it's something that I really enjoy doing. Now, as to your real question there, what do I think? I'm one of those people. I have to define the terms. I have to know what I'm talking about. And that was as soon as I got involved in it. Well, how do you define poetry? How would you define it? And of course, I like to say if you got 10 poets together, you'd probably get 15 different answers. Uh, so that was sort of my thing. And that's why I was sort of inspired to contact you and say, hey, let me present my ideas.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that people don't realize that poetry is another form of art that don't always get acknowledged as like writers and authors that write novels and like all these imaginative like type of worlds. Like you can dive into poetry. And oh my goodness, your heart can be filled, your heart can be sunk, you can feel relatable, you can feel heard, you can feel acknowledged. You know what I mean? Like it really allows you to escape reality in another form in a certain format. You know what I mean? So
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
really I don't understand the format per se when it comes to poetry because I don't understand the format. I mean, can you explain the format of a of a
Well,
good poem then?
here I'm a big believer in form follows function.
Okay.
And a lot of times what I start with is not what I end up with because
Okay.
I'll say, all right, let me write it this way. And then I look and I go, you know what works. In fact, it's funny. I had, this is, I wrote one poem. I lived for 3 years in Puerto Rico.
Oh, nice.
And one of the people I knew down there lived in such a strange place. Well, it is called Isla del Encanto and Island of Enchantment.
Mm.
And I tried writing a poem about his house and the grounds where he lived, and it just wasn't working. Well, then I was writing a short story, and I said, you know what? Bobby's property would be a perfect opening for the story. So I added some more elements in, and it became the opening of a short story I wrote. So, sometimes what you start with is not what you end up with. Uh,
That's good.
but as far as when you look at form, and it's something I've lately gotten more into, the other formats, the styles of poetry, and I'm really enjoying it because once again, over the years, I became comfortable with the free form style of writing, maybe a little slant rhyme, but end rhyme once in a while. But now I've really gotten caught up in a lot of these Japanese forms of poetry, which are a
Mm.
lot of fun because you have to do it this way, you have to do it that, and some of the Spanish forms as well. Uh, it's been a lot of fun doing that because you start with the idea. Now, how do I make it fit into this form?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you got to choose the right words. And
mhm.
oh my goodness, because I feel like with poetry, it's all about wording. Oh my goodness, it's all about wording because you can
Yeah,
put listen in one part of it and then you could put a here in another part of it and then it totally makes it change. You know what I mean? It
yeah,
makes it more deeper. You know what I mean? By just with those two different words. So it's like
yeah.
people don't realize like poetry really does reveal parts of your heart, parts of your soul, parts of your experiences in
Mhm.
life that brings a type of unity, you know. So I guess I have to ask you, have you ever been to a poetry slam and do you like those type of environments?
I go to readings. I don't know if some of them are probably called slams. I have to admit I am not that theatrical.
Okay.
I just read the stuff pretty straightforward. I mean, I try to imbue a little bit of emotion, but I prefer the written word as writing. And that's like one of the things. By the way, I had to kind of chuckle when you said listen and hear. One of my favorite poems opens with the listen, and about 3 or 4 lines in has not hear but heard. I wrote a
Oh.
poem about Miles Davis, and and the opening line is "Listen."
Oh.
But
See? It works out. I mean, what is a poem that you don't mind sharing with us?
well, geez, I can do any number. Actually,
You
let's
could just
see.
pick one. You could just, yeah, you could just
Yeah,
pick one. I know you have many books with poetries with your work in it. So it's like, out of all of them, what is one poem
well,
that
let
you don't
me.
mind sharing with us?
I'll do a short one, and actually, I'll make it the one I mentioned is the first poem I actually ever wrote.
Oh, thank you.
And if I can find it because I want to get it right. Here we are. And it's called In Pink Neon.
Okay.
Chrome and black tile at breakfast again. Coffee so strong it pulls your eyelids back going down. And while last evening's drunks with 5 a.m. shadows use it to try to face the new day, women, legs on spiked heels, lift leather skirts to reveal specialties of the house, initiating a physical negotiation, trading the tangible for currency. Enclosed cuffed hands, scaling triangle of whole wheat drips from sunny side up. A single waitress covers ground, butter warmed by sun shining through slatted glass, slowly rolls down a stack of brown pancakes. Silverware clatters, china against china, napkin falls, voices chatter, while outside in pink neon a sign glows. Best food in town. And it is.
See, that's
So,
beautiful. I mean, that's just, it's something so simple in a scenery that people would just bypass, not even consider everything that you just described.
uh,
And the fact that you were able to describe it and put it in there, we were able to actually see what you see, felt what you felt, understand the levels
yeah,
of where you're going. And I think that's the beauty of poetry. It allows us a glimpse into your mind. You know what I mean? I
yeah,
think that's
and
the
that's
positive. I think that's the positive end of poetry. But in your perspective, what are, or if there are any downfalls of poetry?
well, there's also the horrors of poetry. You know, anybody who's ever read Baudelaire knows that, or even Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
You know, people talking to birds and things of that nature. Um, I think I just and this is sort of my personal slam against slam poetry is a lot of time the performance is more important than the craft of the writing, I find. I'll
Yeah.
hear things, I go, yeah, it was very well done, but if I read on the page, it just wouldn't be that interesting to me. Uh,
Yes, I agree. I've seen the movie 22 Jump Street, and I don't know if
okay.
you've seen the movie, and but there's a
Yeah.
part where they do a poetry
Yeah.
slam, and the guy has no idea what he's doing. So he goes up there and just says random words in like
Yeah.
emphasis and big dramaticness, and it's like, die, we die for ICB, and then I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, like,
I'll,
so
I'll,
yeah, I,
I'll give you one even better. Who is it? Moliere, the playwright, the French playwright who did, of course, what's his most famous one is the religious hypocrite, but he's a very great satirist. And he wrote a play about academics, which is funny because technically I guess I am one. But
yeah,
there's a scene in the play where these two, they're both frauds. Both these guys are frauds, but they're putting themselves up as these professors of philosophy and all that stuff. And they have a poetry challenge. And they're horrible. The things they're reading to each other or saying to each other, and the audience, not the audience in the audience, but the audience in the play is all sitting around just oohing and eyeing and oh my God, how deep and how wonderful. It's like, no, it's the worst stuff that you probably ever heard.
yes. Oh my goodness, I agree. I think that's the one things that I don't like about poetry slams is that I don't see the authenticness
Yeah.
really there. You know what I mean? Because
Well, and that's where
when
you get into sort of it's the effect more than, and this kind of circles back to, how do I define poetry? And it's funny because, like I say, when I started, I just searched all over. How do you define it? How do you define it? And I
yeah,
looked up, and I mean, some of them are really wonderful. For example, was it Adrian Rich said poetry is a concentration of the power of language. That's a pretty good one.
yeah,
It's concentration of power of language. Rita Dove, poetry is language at its most distilled and most powerful. Here again, a really good definition. And there was a bunch of others. When I first started teaching, I had to laugh because in this textbook, I had this textbook to define poetry as, quote, an arrangement of words into patterns predetermined by the poet, end quote. I said, yeah, well, so, okay, but so is graffiti. Doesn't mean it's poetry. An
yeah,
advertisement is a prearrangement, a predetermined pattern.
yeah,
Yeah, uh, so there were a lot of them that I like. But the funny thing is, and this is why I love sharing this topic, is the best definition I ever heard was actually on a train ride from Canada back to Florida. Well, I was getting on in Vermont, but it was coming out of Montreal. And I sat down and this is while I'm in school and I'm working on some of my own stuff. And this guy sitting next to me looks over and he goes, hey, are those your poems? I said, yeah. So, well, I write poetry too. And we started talking back and forth. And all of a sudden, the guy behind us pops his head up and goes, you guys talking about poetry? And we're like, yeah. He said, well, So the three of us basically went to the bar car and sat around and talked and, exchanged pieces we had with each other. And then that's when I brought up, I said, look, one of the things, how would you define poetry? How would you set it up? And the
yeah,
guy from Canada, and I wish I could remember his name, but this is 30, 40 years ago. Um, he said, poetry is the history of the human soul. And I
Ooh.
went, that is it. That is the,
That is it. That's a mic drop. That's like phew,
yeah,
mind
that is the
blown.
best definition I ever heard. And I said, yeah, because when you think of it, first of all, poetry began as history. When the Greeks wrote the poems, they were the historical record. I mean, obviously based in legend and myth, but still there was a history in there. But also there's the idea of, and kind of dovetails off John Gardner, who was one of my favorite American novelists, said that writers, there's no such thing as a new idea. The job of the writer is to convey what he called the old immutable truths into language for your contemporaries. And I think that's, the human soul. And here again, I got to kind of veer off. I'm a big believer in tabula rasa, that we are the sum total of our memories and experiences. Who I am now is based on all the stuff I've gone through up to this point. Uh, and so the poems will change, obviously, because I'm getting older and, I have different views and that kind of thing. But I was
Yeah.
like, God, that is the best definition. It's the simplest. It's also the best. And it's the most expansive. You can take it and go, yeah. Because what
Yeah.
is history? It's the written record of events.
Yeah.
And the human soul is, well, who am I? What am I? And that's where I get into, yeah, the really good, I mean, just locally, there's a woman here, Jackie Chow. I'll go ahead and mention her name. I think she's a wonderful poet. I love her stuff. Whenever she's at a reading, I try and be there. Whenever she's got something, I try and read it. Uh, And then there's other people that go, okay, these guys are big names. Jackie's not a big name, but there's other people that are bigger names. I go, yeah, well, okay, you perform well, but man, Jackie's getting to the heart of the matter to me
Yeah.
in her own experience. And
Yeah.
she reveals herself very much. And that's kind of what I hope I do in my work
Yeah.
as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, just listening to your first, I mean, for your first poem that you've written, it really does reveal your history. You know what I mean? It reveals a time in your soul where you experience that matter in hand, and we were able to be part of that. You know what I mean? So every time
Yeah.
you write a poem, it truly is bringing us into your space, bringing us into your mind, bringing us into your heart. And I think that's the beauty of poetry is that it allows you to think about life, about situations, about places, about matters, about everything,
Mhm.
and just a shift of a perspective, like something that you just wouldn't necessarily think about. And it allows you to have that possibility to think about it in a whole new way. You know what I mean? It's a whole new playing field for you to just open yourself up without any remorse or about anything, you
Yeah.
know? And if people don't receive it, the best thing I always tell people, if people don't receive your art, they're not for you. Point blank, period. They're not for you. Out of the billions and trillions of people out in this world, you're going to get upset at one person? No. Keep it going. Now you know that person's not for you. Now keep it going. And now you can find your people, you know? Like, I don't, how do you necessarily handle people who don't understand your poetry?
I don't worry about it too much. When I was in school, I actually edited a local arts and entertainment magazine that we did, and I always loved. We did an interview with a local artist. She was a photographer, and one of the things she said really stuck with me. She says, "If you're going to be an artist, you've got to be sensitive enough to get tuned into what's going on around you and convert it into whatever medium you're working in. But you also got to be tough enough to take you know, the criticism. And if you can't handle both, then don't get involved." And so, yeah, I don't think my work is for everybody. Uh, I hope that even if a person maybe doesn't like what I've written, at least they get an understanding of what I am. Uh,
Yeah.
and that kind of gets back to, which was funny because, the blue collar poet, I've always worn that with pride. I said, yeah, I think a lot of my stuff is rooted in 20 something years of working on ships and driving cabs and whatever else, like bartending, all that stuff. But also now I find I'm getting much more reflective. It comes with age.
Yeah.
You can't move as much, so you reflect more. Uh, but but now I'm writing a lot about my youth, my childhood, growing up, some of the characters I ran into and knew. I mean, I did one of my, was it my last book or next to last book called First Work about my first job. And my latest book, I have a one about here again a childhood memory, and people of my age would probably hear it and go, "Yeah, I was there." And what I'm hoping is people that are a lot younger go, "So that's what life was like."
Yes, that's exactly why everybody needs to just like receive the information that
Mm,
comes from the older generation because it allows us a light, a peek into a world that we have no understanding,
yeah,
no knowledge, no comprehensions. Yeah, the
yeah,
history, yeah, the schools, they can tell you so much, but they can only
yeah,
tell you so much, but when you
yeah,
go out and you find art from artists
yeah,
who have that understanding of what actually happened in a certain time period in a certain era, it allows you a glimpse into it, and then it gives
yeah,
you that appreciation, that value, like wow, they've made it, they turn they the test of time is in their life,
yeah.
is in their work. So it really is amazing. And it sucks to see that time is catching up to us, Bill, because I could feel like we could continue talking about this for hours on end. It really is interesting. And I love this. But what can be some lasting words that you could help us off keep on thinking?
Oh God, that's a tough one there. Well, I mean, I would hope anybody who gets involved in poetry, well, one of the things I've always said about poetry, it's both an oral and an oral art. Oral, meaning it's meant to be spoken, and Aural, meaning it's meant to be heard. Uh,
Mm.
and I always tell my students, when you're reading a poem, read it out loud for God's sakes.
Yeah.
You can, and you got to read it a few times. I mean, why do you think poetry books are so thin? They're meant to be returned to again and again. It's different from a novel where you're creating a whole world and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think and I always say you got to put it in the time. I'm a big believer in that. I mean, when I studied lit, I was part of the new historicist movement, which says any piece of art is not just reflective of the artist, but also the reflective of the time that that
Yeah.
person was surrounded by, and kind of gets back to the tabula rasa thing. I'm a big believer in. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I read older stuff now. It's like, well, would I have written it? But here again, could Salvador Dali have existed in the 1700s? No. You had to have Freud and people like that writing before you could, move into visual art like he did.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I always say poetry, writers tend to be about 50 years behind visual artists. Uh, if
Oh,
you look at the history,
absolutely.
you'll see the visual artists break the boundaries first, then come the musicians, then come the writers.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Oh yeah. I think all artists in that format, they're above their time. I mean, even
yeah,
Edgar Allan Poe, despite his personal life, he still wrote beautiful pieces, even despite how
mhm,
dark they were. They
yeah,
still resembled a time that was still dark for him and that so many other people can relate to because we've all dealt with some
yeah,
dark times in our lives. And it really is interesting because man, if we just take that time to just consider, reflect, and
yeah,
just consume it for ourselves, it really does feed us to something that of value that nothing else can truly give us. So that is truly something to leave us off with to continue on thinking. I truly appreciate this, Bill. And ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this conversation, because how could you not? Oh my goodness, how could you not? Please go check out Bill. I have his photo on my website, or if you're listening on audio on YouTube, you have access to his website, access to all of his great books with all of his poetry. Man, he has more than five, more than 10. He has plenty of these poetry books so that you can continue on thinking. Because isn't that the point, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, it is. It's to keep on thinking. So with that being said, bye.